So fellas, unless you've been living under a rock, you should know that UFC 303 at the time of this video being recorded is under jeopardy. I'm pretty sure, and most MMA fans are speculating, that Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler's off. If you haven't been keeping up, the first thing that speculated towards this being off was the press conference getting cancelled. The UFC didn't tell us why the press conference got cancelled. It got cancelled on the day. Now they've deleted all the free fight footage. Usually when there's a pay-per-view or a fight up and coming, they'll usually post some free fights to promote that card. All the free fights of McGregor have been deleted, and now you can't even pre-buy the pay-per-view on the ESPN website. So it's all the stars are alluding towards the fact that this is going to be cancelled. The UFC have been absolutely radio silence as well. Even Michael Chandler's had these self-help. Someone tweeted as well, Michael Chandler's getting these self-help quotes out, which just makes me think that Michael Chandler versus Conor McGregor might be cancelled. And MMA fans, even when McGregor was the main event and Chandler was on and everything, they thought this card was garbage. And if that fight is off, this honestly might go down as one of the worst pay-per-views of the year. I actually thought this was a decent card for a McGregor card, but you take away McGregor, this is going to be terrible. So I'm here to save UFC 303, trying to make this an actual decent pay-per-view with no title fights on it, and I'll explain why there's no title fights on it, and try and keep it, add a few fights that are going to add to this card. So I've got a couple fights that I think could happen and should happen, and we'll go with that in the main event. Now, I've heard a lot of people saying that Max Holloway versus Michael Chandler should be the main event. I don't think this is going to happen. I mean, first of all, I know Max Holloway is the BMF and it fits the whole BMF criteria, but first of all, I don't think Max Holloway wants to risk his featherweight title shot if he loses to Michael Chandler. I mean, you got to realise as well, he's got 3 weeks as well. Michael's had a full training camp. Holloway's got 3 weeks to prepare for Chandler. And I'm not saying that Holloway wouldn't beat Chandler. I think he'd box his head off in a full camp, but it's very risky. And I don't know if Holloway wants to do that, especially when he's just had a war with Gaethje at UFC 300 in 3 weeks' time. Other people have called for Pereira to be on this card. I don't like the idea of a UFC champion fighting on that short notice. I know Pereira's an active champion, but having him fight at that short notice against Yuri just wouldn't be the smart idea. Plus, I don't even think he makes 2 or 5 in that space. And let's be completely honest, if Yuri was to beat Pereira at UFC 303, everyone would just be saying, oh, he only won because of the short notice fight. So I don't think that'd work. So the fight that I've come up with is Michael Chandler versus Charles Oliveira. Now, hear me out. First reason, I'm pretty sure Charles Oliveira is the backup anyway. The UFC, I don't know if the UFC announced it, but it pretty much got confirmed that Charles Oliveira will be weighing in as the backup. So if McGregor's injured, then Michael Chandler versus Oliveira 2, you've got a fairly big star in Charles Oliveira. It's a winnable fight for him. I mean, they fought before and he managed to KO Chandler. It's a banger, and it's just a fun main event that still gets to include Michael Chandler. And I know people are going to be saying Michael Chandler wouldn't take that fight because he wants the McGregor fight. I think, unless Chandler gets brutally injured or destroyed to the point where his stardom is gone, I think regardless of if he wins or he loses, he should get the McGregor fight towards the end of the year. And for Oliveira, just pay him a big bag for that fight, for fighting on fairly short notice, even though it's the backup anyway. Chandler versus Oliveira, main event for a non-title fight. Make it 5 rounds. It's a banger. It's a fun fight as well. We get a fun fight for Oliveira as well. We're not feeding him to another wrestler. Well, he is a wrestler, but Chandler, he hasn't got the fight IQ to use his wrestling. So Chandler versus Oliveira, main event, I think that could go. Like I said, Oliveira's the backup. It's a fun fight. And if you tell Chandler that, listen, we're going to reschedule the McGregor fight towards the end of the year, all you got to do is, not get injured in the Oliveira fight and you don't get brutally beaten to the point where your face is falling off, and we'll give you that fight. So Chandler Oliveira, I like that matchup a lot. And then for the rest of the card, obviously, I just don't think that Chandler versus Oliveira would be enough to make this a decent pay-per-view. So we're going to have to bring in someone who's fought on short notice not too long ago. We need to pay this guy a bag. Kamaru Usman, the king of short notice after the UFC 294 card, fought on short notice against Hamzat, would have won if it was 5 rounds. So let's give him a 5-round fight for the co-main event against Shavkat Rakhmonov. Now, I don't know if Shavkat would take this because it is a fairly risky fight and his title shot might be at risk here. But listen, this would be his biggest win yet if he's able to beat Kamaru Usman. He's fighting a former champion, one of the greatest welterweights of all time, and beating Usman would put the nail on the coffin to say, yes, I am next in for the title shot. And then for Kamaru Usman, if he can beat Shavkat, that's a big win as well. And make it 5 rounds so it's beneficial to him. Let him have the championship rounds. That is a big fight there with a big star in Kamaru Usman returning against Shavkat. And I would love to see that fight. How good would that be? Shavkat versus Usman. I mean, we saw Hamzat versus Usman. It was only a 3-rounder, and it seemed like the way that fight was going, if that would have had any more rounds, then Usman would have won the fight. So Shavkat Usman is either the co-main event, or if they still want to keep Hill versus Ulberg as the co-main event, I guess they can do that. Move Bueno Silva off the main card. She does not deserve to be on the main card. And let's add Shavkat versus Kamaru Usman. This is a fight that I want to see regardless. Like I said, pay Shavkat a big bag because his title shot kind of is at stake, because I feel like if Shavkat just waits around, he is going to get a title shot. But then again, I'm pretty sure the UFC were looking to do JDM and Shavkat, and now that JDM's out, let's do Shavkat Usman. And then the final fight, we need, again, the king of short notice fights to return. The guy who's literally just fought at UFC 302 and took fairly no damage. Kevin Holland. Now, here's the thing. I don't know what division he's going to be fighting at. Because he's just fought at 185 and this card is in 3 weeks, something tells me that he's going to be sticking at 185. And if he does stick at 185, I've already match made his next opponent, Chris Curtis. Now, Chris Curtis, he fought on short notice against Brendan Allen. Not, as short as this, but it was still a short notice fight. And I've already explained why I love this matchup. It would be such a fun build-up. They'd add to the press conference. You've got Kevin Holland and Curtis. Kevin Holland loves to troll. Chris Curtis hates getting trolled. And then the fight itself is good. Chris Curtis, great boxer. Kevin Holland, crafty striker. That's such a fun matchup to add to the main card of UFC 303. And I know people are going to be, oh, it's too short notice for Kevin Holland. If Kevin Holland ain't fighting on short notice, is it really a Kevin Holland fight? Let's do that 303, Holland versus Chris Curtis, somewhere on the main card. And if Holland does want to stay at welterweight, then I guess there's some fights from there. Neil Magny, the battle of the gatekeepers, the best gatekeeper in the UFC versus the best gatekeeper in the UFC. That'll actually be an interesting fight. You want to turn it up a bit? Kevin Holland versus Jeff Neal. There's a lot of fun fights from at 170 as well. I think, yeah, Holland could fight Jeff Neal. Holland could fight Neil Magny. I'm not mad at either of those, but you add those fights to UFC 303, and I honestly think it could, and I'm not saying it would be saved because I know the casuals probably aren't going to care if McGregor's not there, but it would take it from being a mediocre pay-per-view to a pretty solid pay-per-view. Pay everyone on the card a bag, promise Chandler the McGregor fight, and I know there's people saying, still think McGregor's not out of this fight, and maybe he isn't. Maybe this is all just a useless video, and after I upload this, they're going to come out with something saying that McGregor's still in. But I know there's been a lot of people saying, oh, McGregor's never pulled out of a fight. Yeah, and he never lost in the UFC either, until he fought Nate Diaz. There's a first time for everything is what I'm saying. And even though he's never pulled out of a fight, if he's injured at the end of the day. So postpone McGregor versus Chandler to the end of the year. And for now, let's have Chandler versus Oliveira, Shavkat versus Usman, and let's bring back Kevin Holland after UFC 302 against either Chris Curtis, Neil Magny, Jeff Neal, pretty much anyone. He even tweeted as well, saying that he'd love to be on this card, because as of right now, I'm really intrigued to see what the UFC are going to do if McGregor is out, because they can't just cancel the entire, they could cancel the pay-per-view, which would be crazy, but if the pay-per-view is main evented by Hill and Ulberg and then co-main evented by Ian Gary and MVP, this might be one of the saddest looking pay-per-views of all time. This probably wouldn't even go down as a fight night in any other scenario, and I feel like we need a big pay-per-view, especially after how UFC 302 performed and 301 not being that stacked on paper. We need a big pay-per-view, and if they're going to do it, they've got 3 weeks, which is extremely short notice as well. I don't think most fighters would agree to 3 weeks. To think of a few matchups that would make this worthy, but who knows, maybe by the time this video comes out, they've cleared it up, and maybe McGregor and Chandler are fighting. And how crazy would it be if after all this time, Chandler was the one to pull out? He just missed his title shot, not the title shot, he's missed his McGregor fight that he's been waiting years for, and that ends up being like McGregor versus Oliveira, in which case, if that is the fight, they probably don't have to add any more fights to the card. But that is how I personally would save UFC 303, keeping it as realistic as possible, but making UFC 303 better. But let me know your thoughts on this whole situation. Like I said, maybe after this video has been uploaded, it's all been cleared up. But yeah, just let me know your thoughts on this situation and the facts that I've added, and thank you for watching.